What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you in advance of another 2024-2025 NBA look ahead. We're on to the Denver Nuggets, so I got to speak with Adam Mares of DNVR Sports, of Locked On Nuggets, host at All City NBA podcast with Tim Legler. Those guys are sickos. They're going to be ramping back up soon, he tells us later on in the episode. We get into all things Nuggets. Wanted to discuss very quickly. We did record this, I think it was like a day or two before Jamal Murray signed his max extension, 4 years, about $208 million. Adam Mares actually reported himself on the DNVR show, I think that day in the emergency podcast, that there's no options or anything on it. So just the full 4 years. So he's under contract for another 5 years. When you include next season, we talked about the extension as if it wasn't done, but we did discuss Jamal Murray in the terms of he's just going to be a Nugget, not for only next season, but just beyond. So, but wanted to give the note because while there are some notes about whether he's going to get the extension, we didn't really talk about whether he's worth it. I think I said it was like the Nuggets have no other choice than to give it to him. Why would this even be a debate? I did ask him why it might have been taking so long. So again, recorded before that, but the rest of the episode is all extremely germane. Got Adam for over an hour, so I think you're really going to enjoy it. If you're new around these parts and you're sitting through an intro, subscribe already. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, the whole nine. Anyone who can like, comment, help the algo, love us back on YouTube. Some love in the comments would be nice. We get a good amount of it, but there are people that just complain too much. So get in the comments on this episode. Obviously, your opinions mean a lot too, and I will respond to as many of you as possible. Join our Discord if you're new around here. The link to that is in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. And look, if you've done all those things, please consider spreading the word about us, shouting us out, sharing our episodes, anything you could do to help Hardwood Knocks become bigger and better and just generally enormous. And with that, I take us to the Denver Nuggets 2024-2025 NBA season look ahead with the one and only Adam Mares. Adam, welcome back. Thank you so much for coming back, number one, to do the Denver Nuggets look ahead with me. How are you doing this year, man?
I'm doing great. Needed this offseason, I think, more than any other one. But, it's that time where I'm ready to be back into the NBA. So I'm excited.
The Olympics didn't kind of mess with that at all?
No, because it felt so different from the NBA. It felt like a whole separate thing. So it was fresh and new and exciting. But the NBA, I definitely needed like the 4-month break we got.
I totally feel that from you. So the Nuggets, lots of stuff like kind of happened, or feels like there's lots of stuff to talk about. So I have to start off rip here, as I think leading into free agency, it became pretty clear that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope was going to leave, or at least that seemed like the most likely outcome. Were you still at all, and I've heard you talk about this a bunch, but were you still at all surprised that Denver didn't even go okay, we'll pay him and we'll just figure this out later if we're trying to cut costs route?
Well, I mean, surprise is the operative word there for me. I wasn't surprised because I think I have a pretty good sense of what Calvin Booth in the front office's vision is and what things they value. So I kind of assumed that this was going to happen, but I am surprised in that I disagree with it. I thought he was a guy. The way you put it was great. I think the second apron concerns are real and in many ways valid. And I don't think it's just financial. I know a lot of people think it's just Kroenke's wanting to cut money. I don't think it's that. I do think it's flexibility and the concern about what you could do going forward. But my philosophy in the NBA is everyone thinks they can see around the corner better than they actually can. And I think you can only plan 1 year at a time. And if you sign him and it's like, we have to get off of him or make maneuvers next summer, so be it. That's just the way the world works. That's the way the NBA works. It would not have been more difficult to do that, try to maneuver under the second apron next summer than it will be to try to build a contender next summer. So to me, I think the calculus was wrong on that. I think they would have been a better team with him this year, and you just figure it out down the road.
Doc, I'm going to get there in a second. So I have to talk about the Jamal Murray thing first, though, because that's the other sort of thing that's looming over this. I've had him penciled in for just the 4-year extension. I know you've kind of assumed that that's coming. Is that still the expectation? And what, if anything, has gone into just this delay?
Yeah, I mean, that is the $210 million question. Why is it taking so long? And I think there's a couple things. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Jamal Murray is now injury prone. Like if we're going to start from the top about concerns with him, some of them can be fair, some of them can be speculative or matters of opinion, but one that can't be is that he's just injury prone. And the one big injury you could point to and say could have happened to anybody, but now all the subsequent ones, and even if you go back before that, he always had little things that he was just banged up, missed 5 games here, missed 7 games here. So I think now as you set out to say, the best player in franchise history, Nikola Jokic. You want to have him for forever, his entire career, and his prime will span the entirety of this extension that you're likely to give Jamal. I think it's a fair question to say, is he going to be healthy and motivated for that period? And if not, then there's reason to be concerned about it. And when you watch how injured he was last year with things like calf strains, hamstring strains, like soft tissue injuries that you sit there and go, come on, what is going, like Zion Williams-esque injuries that make you concerned for a player. When you go through those and then you watch him go through 2 months of not playing into Team Canada and all of a sudden he doesn't look any better, I think it's natural to say, like, what are we getting from Jamal going forward? Is that what is his motivation level? So part of me thinks that the team likely wanted to give it the summer to kind of evaluate him, his approach and different things. And then there's likely, though this has never been reported, this is my own opinion, my own speculation, there's likely some of these nagging injuries that the team and probably the ownership group wants to say, let's just see what he looks like in September. Let's just see if he actually has rehabbed properly from these injuries and is healthy before handing out that contract. What leverage do we have to lose at that point? He still would almost certainly sign it. If you give it to him on September 29th, the night before media day, he'll still sign it. So why don't we just give it to that and see how he rehabs? That's my hunch. That's what I think is going. And I think the organization is probably uncomfortable giving him that extension, even though they know they probably have to.
Is there like any risk though, not the word ruin's too strong, but like fracturing then the relations? And then there's also just the element of what is Denver's actual leverage? Because like Jamal Murray is in a vacuum, is Jamal Murray a max player? Debatable. To the Nuggets and how valuable he is to them, it's not really up for debate. And so I guess that's why I'm most fascinated why this is taking so long, because I'm just like, what would the alternative even look like for Denver?
I don't even think it's like Denver doesn't have any leverage. You're 100% right. And I don't even think it's anything that they have done, to position themselves necessarily. I just think it's in the NBA when you have players like this, Brandon Ingram, Andrew Wiggins, guys who are not quite worthy of a max, but hey, what other option do you have? You kind of have to give it to them. But what I think there is more risk and less risk. And there was more risk in giving this to him in June, right? The first day that they could do it, than if they give it to him September 29th, because at least you give the opportunity to see, like, does he pull a hamstring in September? does he blow out his knee in September? So it might as well just be like, hey, this guy seems to get hurt every time he ramps himself up. So why don't we just ramp him up and give it to him the last day to make sure, just to mitigate our risk as much as we possibly can. And that's my hunch about what's going on. I expect it to get signed. I predicted this week. We're on Thursday, so I'm probably going to be wrong on that. But I do expect it before media day.
Is it weird, and maybe not, just because how they prioritize future flexibility, that we haven't heard any rumblings on an Aaron Gordon extension? And the second part of that is it all concerning about, like, well, what's going to happen with Aaron Gordon given how they viewed the KCP situation?
I think that you have to view those two together. And look, we're going to find out, right? I think it's very realistic that Aaron Gordon could be a player that they move on from. And the exact same scenario that you viewed KCP, especially if this season you see a big year from Peyton Watson and they say, hey, maybe he is ready to the degree Christian Braun was. Like, if you go through the season, Christian Braun actually replaces KCP in a way that you go, that was actually good. He was ready to go. I mean, this is Calvin Booth's theory, right? He's going to be ready to go, and that's a good you just swap one guy in for the other. If that happens this year and Denver has a successful season, whatever that means, you go into next year, and I think you would be emboldened to say, well, okay, now Peyton Watson can do the same thing for Aaron Gordon. It allows us to spend money elsewhere. So I think there is a possibility of that. But what I would say is, if you were ranking players in terms of their value to what Denver does, KCP would have ranked 5th, in my opinion. Maybe 4th. You could talk me into 4th, but probably 5th.
I think season, maybe, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, playoffs is you're probably almost certainly 5th. I think Aaron Gordon is clearly 3rd or 4th. I would say 3rd, but 4th is the lowest you would go. So to me, he ranks higher in the priority list, and I think more likely to be extended, retained, or what have you. But at the same time, when you go into a free agency, teams can offer him more years, and Denver is obviously going to be very concerned about their flexibility giving guys years. So I think it is a concern.
I will say the one thing that's working in their favor is it does seem like everyone's getting very extension happy, and the market for just non-stars is so turbulent. Maybe a lot of people think this was a one summer blip. I think it might be a couple summer blips, just even based off some of the things we've seen since the transaction tumult has slowed down. So that bodes well for Denver, unless it's just we don't even want to pay him, beyond next season.
So here's the thing about the Denver organization, and I think this goes back to Tim Conley and now to Calvin Booth. So I think there might be something structurally. I mean, we know the Cronkies like a skeleton crew. They like things to be as thin as possible. the more people you hire, and there's pros and cons to that, by the way. I know it's like easy to say, oh, that's just cheapness. And I think it is motivated by that, but there are strengths to having a smaller, tighter crew making decisions. But the teams that seem to have more people there, especially that run it well, more decision makers, there's people that specialize in things like you're talking about. Okay, let's forget what we need, our team needs. What's the market going to be in a year or two from now based on everything that's happening? And I think Denver has been bad at that. They've like some of the contracts they've offered, they haven't seen around the corner as well as other teams have in terms of, well, are we going to have leverage or aren't we, based on some of the indicators we see already? So I think Denver probably, honestly, doesn't necessarily have an in-depth strategy there, but I could be wrong.
I've been asking everyone what their biggest storyline is that they're tracking for the specific team, but for the Nuggets, and I would love it if you have a different opinion on this, but we're going to talk about it either way. Is it just like the development of the 3 core youngsters at this point is particularly viewed against the backdrop of KCP leaving?
So I actually think that might be third for me. So it's really important. And I understand, and this is probably a semantic answer, but number 1 to me is Jamal Murray. Even last year, Denver was winning at a 62 win pace when Jokic and Murray played. The truth is we just don't know how many games he's going to miss. He missed 23 last year. No matter what, Denver won 57 games, a franchise record, and their second best player missed 23 games. So I look at this and I go, I think Denver is actually better than what we all were very, very high on him. I think we were appropriately high on them last year. You get an injury to your second best player. He misses a ton of time and the team runs out of gas and they end up coming up short in the playoffs. But I think that on March 10th, out of the All-Star break, they're on a big win streak. I was like, they are the favorite to win the title, and they might have another 16-4 run in them. They were playing at that level. To me, all these other things are important margins and kind of big margins, but Jamal Murray's health, motivation, conditioning, and consistency to me are by far more important than all the other variables for Denver. So to me, that's number 1. And to be honest with you, I have no idea what to expect from Jamal. Is he going to play? He's always been bad in October and November. Is he going to be good this year in ways that are meaningful? And this is look, his stock is at an all-time low, and I have to think that he hears all the noise. He also ended last year, if you recall, by throwing a heat pack onto the floor. I think his reputation, not only in how he plays, but I think also to some extent his character is in question in ways that I hope and I would expect him to say, okay, I need to remind people this year, because at the moment there's valid arguments that I am the guy the haters think I am and not who I think I am.
He's might be just one of the players that have explored the most extreme peaks and valleys. And this past year or 18 months, whatever, might be a perfect example where I was being asked to go on podcasts, radio shows last year after they won the title. Is Jamal Murray a top 15 player was the question. Yeah. Yep. And now it's oh man, should the Nuggets even pay this guy? It's only been a
year. So I think ESPN had him 17th last year in the player rank, really, really high. All, coming off of that incredible finals. I'm so curious to see where ESPN has him this year. I'm guessing it's 40th, somewhere around there. And it's crazy, right? That he should be ascending as a player, not dropping that far.
Right. Yeah. That is a fascinating way to frame it. I think my biggest storyline for them is Michael Malone had said, I think it was his exit interview, I don't think it was a random one, where he mentioned I need to do a better job of emerging from the bunker, basically, of the regular season to play the longer game. Is that actually going to happen? I'm assuming we're just referring to, the staggering patterns in the way when you look at the, after the Julian Strawther injury specifically, Denver Post had a great article where they're looking at minutes usage and how heavily the Nuggets relied on their top 7 guys, and just those staggering patterns. You and I have talked about it a bunch in years past. Is there potential for change here? And even Zach Lowe kind of casually mentioned on his return podcast that there's mumblings now that the disconnect between the front office and the coaching staff is growing. And I was like, well, that doesn't really square with what Michael Malone said at the exit interview. So I'm so confused by what is going on here.
So first of all, this is such a fascinating thing. There's 3 ways I want to answer this. Let's see if I can remember all 3. The first is, it wasn't an exit interview. It was an unscheduled press conference that was kind of bizarre when it happened. Why are we doing a press conference? And the reason was, it had been reported in multiple places that there was, some tension behind the scenes. Josh Kroenke, Calvin Booth, and Michael Malone come out again on a press conference, and it was clearly a united front, right? Hey, we're going to come out here and show them that we're together. So when Michael Malone says things like that, first of all, I go, okay, well, that was the point of the press conference, right? For everybody to kind of say, we have to come together. We all made mistakes. Let's show a united front. Number 2, there are personality types that I think are good at wearing different masks, seeing different perspectives and maybe having flexibility in core values and things like that. Michael Malone is the opposite of that. Michael Malone is a guy who is insanely principled and really believes what he believes. And then number 3, Michael Malone is the son of a coach, Brendan Malone, a very popular, he's a lifer. He grew up in the NBA. He grew up around coaches. And Michael Malone's first coaching job, he was fired because DeMarcus Cousins got spiral meningitis. They were having a good season. He gets sick. They go on a losing streak and he's fired. I think that has scarred Michael Malone in ways that really texture all of his decision-making, which is to say, I need to play the long game. Well, what happens when we're 500 in November? I get fired. Like I'm doing a good job over here. There's good indicators, but you said this is what you needed. I did it. And now I'm fired for it. And I think that's how Michael Malone thinks. And that's why he will ride starters and play veterans and do all these things, because at least he can point to, hey, we were 9-4 in November. Like, you're not going to fire me now. We're 9-4. You can't fire me at that moment.
Could there have been any element to that factoring into the KCP walking where it's, well, we need to take this, as everyone said, the club out of Michael Malone's bag. Like, now you have no choice but to play at least 2 of these young guys now, because you can't not play the bench at all.
I 100% think that all of Michael Malone's decisions as a coach are at least partially influenced, whether consciously or subconsciously, by that factor. And I'll tell you some crazy examples of this. I mean, one, we remember Nikola Jokic took a year and a half before he could start consistently for the Nuggets, which is in hindsight, obviously an insane thing. But you even look at Christian Braun comes in. Davon Reed started over him for half the year, his rookie season, when they needed somebody to play in that position. And you look at it and go, why on earth would you do that? Well, I think there is a level of, you play a rookie and lose, like, it's on you. If you kind of go the other way. So if you look at Justin Holiday played last year, and Michael Malone, when he said, and when you mentioned that show a United Front press conference, again, I'm digesting every single phrasing and every single word of this because, I understand the different dynamics at play. One of the things he said was, yes, I need to play some of the other guys, but what options do I have? Like, I had to play. He's basically saying I had to play Justin Holiday in the playoffs. I had to, because all I had was a rookie, Peyton Watson, who, again, by the way, I think Peyton Watson clearly the better option in that spot. But it's easy for him to say, and logical, I think, for people to believe, well, yes, you had to do it because Justin Holiday has 10 years of experience and Peyton Watson has 2,000 minutes of experience, and this is an elimination series. So, yes, you have to go out there. And I think that is how he thinks. So now you take the training wheels off. There is no Justin Holiday. I don't think the KCP move was that necessarily, but I do think when you look at the end of the roster, Hunter Tyson, Jalen, Pickett, DaRon, Holmes, guys that are not going to play, there are no options that are your break glass in case of emergency options for Denver.
So that's going to be something then, just to what is his response to that? Like, they've given him no options, but like, is he going to figure out a way around that anyway type deal?
1,000%. I mean, this is the thing, is there is no foolproof method. And I think and I've said this a lot, I think Calvin Booth is a very smart basketball mind with really great perspective and opinions. But I do think he struggles with the interpersonal dynamics of a person like Michael Malone, a stubborn, and by the way, Michael Malone's not an anomaly. Most NBA coaches, you rise to that level through shrewd thinking and being able to, like, hey, you have the mind of a general. So being able
to knock on Coach Bud. Like, that was just like, he just wouldn't adjust anything, everyone thought. So.
Tibbs, I mean, you go through the list, there's a lot of great coaches who are like, yeah, you know what? It's my way, and you stay out of the kitchen here. You give me the ingredients and then get out of the kitchen. I think if I look at it, there's a couple things. One, I don't love Michael Malone has been tied to his rotations. I know we're talking about that later. He plays his 5-man starters and 4 starters, 1 bench guy more than anyone else, and he plays 0 starters or 1 starter more than anyone else. I think Denver's roster you're going to have to go away from that. But there's decisions like, where do you play Peyton Watson? His value, in my opinion, is that he has the mobility of a guard and the length of a forward. But if you play him at forward, all of a sudden, like, you've lost some of that advantage. So do you play him there? Do you play DeAndre Jordan any minutes? Do you play Russell Westbrook in positions that really make it fail? I mean, I look at that and I go, Russell Westbrook is so volatile. If you're going to believe in him working out in Denver, there's a lot of variables that you think are going to hit. But it'd be very easy to sabotage that. Like, if you were trying to make Russell Westbrook fail as what was I supposed to do? You gave me Russell Westbrook in a championship year. That's
just
the easiest
with
job.
All the non-spacers in those, like, secondary lineups.
I mean, I'm not even kidding when I say this. If you play Russell Westbrook, Peyton Watson, Aaron Gordon together, and maybe throw out Saric out there, and the bench just kills you, every columnist in America will write, well, look at this bench. The front office gave him the worst bench of all time. And like, what's going on? Like, Michael Malone did all he could. And it's a very easy argument to make.
So Russell Westbrook, I want to start with this.
That was number 2, by the way. Number 2 storyline. The young guy's number 3.
I think that Westbrook is polarizing. I will say 2 things have almost sold me on it. One is that Nikola Jokic wanted this to happen. And so I'm just like, you know what? I'm wrong about everything. 2, you recorded, I think it was a solo podcast for Locked On Nuggets, where you really went into detail about the things they could use him, like how they could use him, the lineups that they could tailor him to. So I came away from that and I was like, okay, this might work. But now, like, I've had more time and space, and it's just like I look at the track record of Russell Westbrook, and I can't quite get there. So I'm just curious, as you know, your viewership has already heard all this, but I'm just curious as to like, where are you at with this fit? What are you monitoring? What intrigues you the most about it?
Again, the number one part of this is I think organizational alignment is so important. I do think that everybody in the organization wants that alignment. I don't think this is a thing where it's like everyone is so dug in. I think everybody will come into a new season with sort of fresh perspective and, hey, let's work together on this. But that being said, the number one thing is just, are you going to have the same vision for how to maximize Russell Westbrook? Because for this to have a chance, everything kind of has to go perfect, in my opinion. This is not one that you can get the 50th percentile and it's going to work out. You kind of need it to work out big time. But number one, what he brings is leadership. And I know that his type of leadership, maybe people will roll their eyes at that, but Denver's a weird team. Jokic is their best player, but he's a weird leader. Great lead by example guy. Everybody looks up to him, and I think everybody has a healthy respect for him so that they want to do right by him. But he doesn't necessarily call anyone out. And I think when we talk about the number 2 leader, Jamal Murray, is the guy that probably needs the most calling out. So you have a weird dynamic here. And Russell Westbrook represents an example of a guy that I think can be that type of leader for Denver in the locker room, and hopefully pushes Jamal to be the best version of himself. You know, I tell this story on the other podcasts I do, but I was told Russell Westbrook, in his first arrival in Denver to sign his contract, took stock of the locker room and called people and told them, what the heck's going on with your locker? It's disgusting, total mess. And like, that's the type of stuff that sounds simple and dumb, but I think Denver actually needed it. Like, nobody else would have said, hey man, your locker room kind of smells like you're kind of ruining it for everybody else. So I think he's a guy that's going to have everybody working as hard as they possibly can. And that's important. But the on-court fit, 1000% comes down to how much Russell Westbrook is willing to adapt his shot profile. Because I think he's adapted his game pretty well with the Clippers. We saw him try to adapt and come off the bench and play different styles. But he still doesn't seem to understand where what is a good shot and what is a bad shot relative to where he is as a player right now. And Denver is a team that doesn't get a bunch of just bucket getter buckets. And I don't think Westbrook's going to provide those. What they get is smart basketball and efficiency, because they're smart about what shots they take. One player can ruin all of that. One player taking bad shots lowers your efficiency enough to now it's like, well, we can't survive without it. And that's by far the biggest concern.
Do you think it's more important to get, and obviously he'll play with both of them, but is it more important to get him to, when you're looking at some of those staggered lineups, minutes with Jamal Murray or minutes with Nikola Jokic? Like, what is going to be like the more optimal way to maximize his fit?
Well, we have a 9 and 10 year sample size that if you play with Jokic, you're optimized. And if you play with Jamal Murray, you're not optimized. Jamal Murray without Nikola Jokic. I mean, Jamal Murray has ran Denver's bench for several iterations, and it just never seems to elevate it. It's not something that works. On top of that, as we saw with Team Canada, I mean, part of what, in my opinion, what went on with Team Canada was he just doesn't look healthy or in great shape. And that's concerning. But another part of it is, Jamal Murray kind of needs the ball in his hands. He's not good at reducing his role into other spots. And I think if you play with Russell Westbrook, unless Russell Westbrook is your off-ball floor spacer, which I don't think is great, then you probably need to share the rock a little bit and play off. And Jamal Murray I don't think he's very interested in that. But he also doesn't seem especially good at that, which is surprising because it was the role he found himself in at Kentucky. So it's something he seems to have lost along the way, or at least lost the impact of. So I don't think so. I think you play Westbrook and Murray opposite. Michael Malone has never done this, though. Jamal Murray has been the one starter that he has put with his bench in the entirety of Murray's existence. I think one of the big questions is, does Malone go away from that? Because it clearly doesn't seem like it's the right play.
The Dario Saric fit, what kind of intrigues you about that?
Well, what intrigues me is that I think he is a Jokic facsimile, which is important. You know, Denver has tried players that are not at all like Jokic. Okay, we're giving a different look off of our bench, and it just hasn't worked. I do think there's something to You can run your elbow offense through Saric, and everything kind of looks and feels the same, even though it's a lesser version of it. But at least there's continuity of what we're trying to do and the reads we're making. He is a backup center, and by the way, I know there's a lot of discussion about whether or not he's a center for Denver. In the NBA, I think 6'10" is a fine center for a backup center. You have DeAndre Jordan for the 3 or 4 teams you're going to need a bigger body against if you actually need that. But I think he'll be good as the fulcrum of the second unit. He passes the ball extremely well. And then the last piece of this is Dario Saric. I'm not sure we've actually seen the best of him. His last 2 healthy years have been the best version of him, but because he's only 29, 30 years old, I think, and he doesn't really rely on his athleticism, I think it's possible that he is a better player than what he has shown in the ramp up to him in his career. The thing I'm not excited about Saric is I just don't think he's a Westbrook player. So you have a player that I actually love before you sign Westbrook, but putting him and Westbrook together seems like a bit of 2 different philosophies.
He also, when he was in Phoenix, I think probably some of his best moments, like that was just him at the 5. And so I think he's perfectly fine as a backup center. My qualm with it was viewing it in tandem with the Westbrook signing is Sarge hit his threes, and he's hit his threes in the past. He doesn't take a ton of them, like 6 per 36 minutes. I guess at the center spot, like that'll probably be well above average, but I don't think defenses care. Yeah. And I also just didn't understand why he got the mini MLE. That was the other thing that just was like, is this a second year of they're just giving this out just because? So I found that interesting, especially because it's a player who, in theory, you're using to play your best player's best position.
And this is when I talk about Denver. While I like some of the basketball decisions and thinking, I don't always love that they maximize the value that they're getting. And that's an example of it. Same with Reggie Jackson getting 2 years on his deal, and then you have to pay to get rid of him on the second one. It seems like Denver can, even when they are right on things, seem to mess up the margins just a little bit that end up coming back to haunt you. So I agree with you. I'm not sure there was other teams that were out there trying to get him for that.
And I guess just because you had mentioned this before we had actually started, that you thought I was a little bit lower on their offseason overall than you. And I guess, do you know where our disconnect then comes from? Is it just you're waiting? Well, I understand the vision of this team, and I'm coming at it from you could have just maintained that vision and kept KCP too, and I'm getting too caught up in that.
No, because again, the KCP part is the hugest part of this, right? And I'm with you lockstep on that one. I just think you figured out down the road. Where I differ with most people is Denver just having Murray come back from injury. And remember, he was terrible for 20 games that year he came back, and they still have a high seed and then go on to go 16-4 in the playoffs. And then last year, missing him for 23 games and winning 57, still going to the second round, even though he clearly was hobbled. Jamal Murray didn't have a good game in the playoffs. I know people will point to game 7. I thought he was terrible in game 7 in the second half. In the first half, he was pretty good, but in the second half, he wasn't. So I look at this and I go, Murray was good for roughly half of the season last year, and they still won 57 games. And if he was healthy at the end, I think they would have at the very least gone to the finals. Boston was such a good team that I think you have to at least give them respect and say that would have, who knows what would have happened there. They won it, so they get to say they would have. But I look at that and say Denver was at least still a title favorite last season. And what they lose in KCP, and I'm higher on probably Christian Braun, Peyton Watson than most people are, I think that you look at them and say they're still a contender. They might not be the favorites that they were of the last 2 years, but I don't think that they are very far below the Bostons of the world. And that's where that to me is just where I look at it. Yes, I think this was not the most optimized offseason, but I still look at Denver and go, they're margins. They're small margins that hurt them and handicap them a little bit, but their margin for error in 2023 was so wide. And even last year, I think it was wider than people realize, that I still think that they're right there in that mix.
I think one of the players who can maybe tilt perception, especially during the regular season of all this, is what Christian Braun does in his expanded role. Is there just a chance that Denver's better off defensively by elevating him into that KCP spot?
This is a controversial opinion, and I say this as somebody that fully respects what KCP does, especially on the offensive end, because I think he was it's underrated how good of a fit he was, both in usage percentage and the skill set he had. But yes, I think that when you look at KCP and what he did for this team, he's one of the best at getting through screens. He's incredibly smart. He's locked in and never takes possessions off. But he did get bullied by a lot of really good players in ways that, and I know everybody gets bullied by star players. You can't shut them down. But in ways that you go, man, it doesn't really feel that different from anyone else. Devin Booker is just giving him the business, and he's making zero impact on him. Anthony Edwards is almost looking for him and hunting him in matchups. Christian Braun is a really good defender, and there are things he brings to the table that KCP did not. So I wouldn't put it that I think he will be better. I just put it in that he will be different. And I think the NBA is as level as it's ever been. There's as much parity as it's ever been. And a lot of this comes down to, do you match up with a team that you just match up well with defensively? Last year, Anthony Edwards was a guy that I wish Christian Braun would have guarded more, because I think he would have had a bigger impact than KCP. If that happens again this year, I think it favors Denver. If you go up against, say, a Steph Curry, now I think you want a KCP. So it's kind of just, I think it's in one hand out the other with them. And that's why I think the team is more or less similar to what they were last year, maybe a slight step below. It's just going to come down to what matchups do you get.
It's funny that my first reaction, and I don't mean to make this so much about KCP, but when he left it wasn't the defense I was worried about. It was, well, how are they just going to replace that 3-point volume? I know it's not been like a huge part of their offense and the way they generate shots. It doesn't always matter. But then you add Russell Westbrook into it all and it becomes combustible. And it just feels like that type of volume is super important. So if Christian Braun's going to make an offensive leap, what does that look like? Is it just the addition of 3-point volume, or is there something else that you're really looking for in that area of his development?
To me, the 3-point volume is, I just don't buy that he's a 3-point shooter, right? I mean, there's some guys you can tell they have fluidity of motion in their shot that you think, okay, can grow. He's a little rigid. Looks like, I mean, he practices it and everything else, but he doesn't look to me like a guy that's going to be a 40% guy on volume. But he also brings other things to the table. One, size. He's enormous compared to KCP, and size is important to today's NBA. I always say, and this goes back to the Wilson Chandler era, Jokic is really good at throwing passes when there's a size advantage to his receiver. And Christian Braun is going to have a size advantage against almost every single shooting guard. So when you talk about cuts, Jokic doesn't need you to beat your guy on the cut. He just needs you to be taller than him so he can throw that fade pass over the top. And Christian Braun is going to be taller, bigger, stronger, and equal, if not more athletic than most of the guys he's going to. And on top of that, one thing he does that KCP did not do well, Christian Braun cuts hard. And in a motion offense, a motion heavy offense like Denver runs, having people that cut hard makes the defense react more strongly. It opens up more passing lanes. So I think, and then you go to offensive rebounding, which is one of Christian Braun's strengths. He needs to emphasize that this year and give Denver second chance opportunities, which is one of his strengths. So I think you gain some there from him that KCP didn't provide. But at the end of the day, shooting is the easiest thing. You don't need to even make your shots to space the floor with shooting. Christian needs to cut hard. He needs to rebound. He needs to do those things. And there'll be nights he doesn't do them. So it is, again, in one hand out the other, but I think it's still a concern because shooting is the easiest thing to have night to night.
What is Peyton Watson's ceiling on defense?
So, I mean, I think it's a Herb Jones level defender, a shutdown type guy. He's that good. He does it in a little bit of a different way than, say, the Jaden McDaniels and the Herb Joneses. He's more of a shot blocker. Mm-hmm. He gets beat off the dribble more than those guys. Those guys kind of bottle people up. You can't get around them. Peyton Watson, more tracks guys and then surprises them and blocks them, which I think if I had to pick between the two, I would rather have the containment. But maybe the containment comes this year. What I think is tough about Peyton Watson, so I think he can be an elite all-NBA caliber defensive player. I think he's that good. I don't know if it comes this early, but I think at some point in his career, he can be that caliber player. The thing that I think is tough for Peyton Watson is I don't love his fit on this bench. Denver's biggest weakness is shooting across their entire lineup. Peyton Watson's not a shooter, but I have a feeling he's going to have to play the role of shooter this year just by default, but just based on who he's going to be next to. It's like, well, we need you to be in the corner knocking down shots, and that's not a strength of his. And then on top of that, Michael Malone had hinted that the starting shooting guard position is up for grabs in camp, which I think is a little crazy. Christian Braun, to me, clearly like he has earned that through what he's done, but Michael Malone likes to do this. And then it gets you thinking, Peyton Watson might be best in that role. Like if you played him there, that might be the best thing for him, but I don't think he'll ever get a chance there. You have Julian Strawther, you have Christian Braun, so he's going to be off the bench in the small forward role, needing to shoot the ball to provide enough spacing. And it's just this season, it's not anybody's fault necessarily. Like I'm not trying to set Malone up here for something, but I don't know that the rotations are going to work out in his favor. So I hope I'm wrong on that because I love Peyton Watson as a player, but I think he might have to swim upstream this year.
And so I guess there's just going to be, even with the addition of Westbrook, even Saric, if you want to use your big man in a way where he's going to have the ball more, the ship is kind of sounding like, well, we see them experiment more with Peyton Watson as kind of a ball handler because to me, he probably has that element of his game more than a Christian Braun would. And so if they're trying to plumb the depths of these guys, I would like to see more of that.
If this was Eric Spoelstra, I would 1000% expect that. I would say if this was Mark Dagnott, I would 1000% expect like, well, what does he do well on offense? He has a really good handle. He seems to be able to get into the paint really well. He's not a great finisher. He doesn't shoot the ball well, but he's a good passer. How do we tailor our offense so that he does the things he's good at and we try to mitigate the things he's not good at? I just don't think that is how Michael Malone operates. I think he looks at it and goes, we need somebody in the corners. Peyton Watson, get there, and you're going to get 4 a game, and you need to make 2 of them. And I just don't count on him to do that. I think he'll have a lot of 0 for 4 nights. And again, that is a criticism of Michael Malone. I don't think he always thinks that way about how to maximize each individual talent. And Peyton Watson, to me, is I just play the numbers game. He seems to be the guy that I think will have the least tailored to him.
What did you make of Julian Strawther last year, pre that sprained knee injury? And then even just, I know a lot of people were happy about what they saw from him in Summer League too.
Yeah, so I was lower on him than I think most people were, and not even lower on him long term. He just looked to me like a rookie, and he looked like a late first-round pick rookie that, okay, this guy could be something in a couple years. He shoots the ball extremely well. He needs to shoot, and to shoot the ball from 3 to be effective. And when you're a young player and not a star, it's hard to get, especially on a championship team, it's hard to get shots. So I think that's kind of how I evaluate him, is I think a lot of people pencil him into, oh, he's going to help the bench score and this or that. He's played half of a season. To expect a guy with 1,000 minutes under his belt to go out there and now save your bench and scoring is a really big ask. And I think he's up for the challenge a few years from now. I don't know if he's going to be up for that challenge this year. I think he'll have games where he scores 30 points this year, because when he gets hot, he's one of those guys that makes 4 or 5 in a row. So I think he'll have some big scoring games, but you need consistency probably from him more than I think he'll be able to provide. And then defensively, when you get to a playoffs, one of the concerning things for Denver is, all right, Christian Braun, the starters, I'll bet you that lineup is really good this year if he plays. You go to the bench and say, who are your guys? I hope it's Peyton Watson. Dario Saric, probably. Westbrook, I have no idea. He certainly wasn't one last year. He was a playoff anchor last year, like a pretty big one. Julian Strawther, in the regular season, teams aren't going to do this, but in the playoffs, is he going to be up to snuff to where you're playing Dallas Mavericks and Luka Doncic is playing against your bench? Do they just hunt him every single time? And if so, I don't think he's going to develop in this 1 year up to the level of, well, obviously nobody wants him to be hunted, but we can survive based on this, this, and this. He might just be a guy that gets scored on every single time and becomes unplayable.
So you think he would be that much of an issue defensively that there's no scenario in which, because of the concerns we just mentioned with Peyton Watson in the role you think he's going to have in the Nuggets, where maybe Julian Strawther just becomes more important to those bench units because of the spacing?
I mean, they have opposite strengths and weaknesses, right? So it might come down to
players into one. How often do you see that?
Right. Well, that would be a superstar, right? I mean, if you had both of those guys on each side. But I think that Michael Malone will come to a point at some point in the playoffs where you have to make the decision of, well, do we put Peyton Watson out there so Luka Doncic isn't just getting free reign to the paint, but we don't have any shooting on the court and we can't score? Or do we put Julian out there and we're going to make some shots, but Luka's probably going to score 18 points this quarter? I think that's going to be a situation Denver finds himself in unless Peyton develops a better shot throughout the year and becomes a more consistent shooter, or Julian is better defensively than I kind of anticipate he will be by the end of this year. And again, it's not even a knock on Julian. It's hard to play defense at that level in the NBA, especially when you're an offensive player. And I think he'll get there, but will he get there by April of next year? We'll find out.
Michael Porter Jr. healthy last season. That's always fun. None of what I'm about to ask him as an insult to Michael Porter Jr., who I tend to be higher on than consensus. But is this his final form? Are there more layers to it? And also, this is like a personal agenda question. Why does he feel like, or to me, the streakiest all-time great shooter in NBA history? Like, you look at his percentages and the volume, knockdown, sniper, all time, and it's just, he seems so streaky, anecdotally.
I can tell you the answer to that second one, and I know it. His shot is so perfect that you just expect them all to go in. And at the end of the year, he shoots 40%. And you're like, man, he was off all year. It's like, no, he wasn't. It just, every time he shoots it, I think it's in. Literally every time, because it's always balanced. It's always perfect form. It's everything. I think the thing with Michael Porter, when you ask if it's his final form, I kind of do. But that, meaning I don't think there's like a major change in the style that he plays or unlocks all these skills. He's off the ball dribbling or this or that. I think Denver can unlock him a little bit more, getting more movement in their offense. I know that has been when we talk about alignment between coach and front office, I think that's probably one of them that I think Michael Malone would say, you want me to run him around more? No, like, this guy belongs in the corner. Our offense is fine. And I tend to side on the other side where I think they can be a little more dynamic and using his gravity, using his movement to increase his gravity and his role in the offense. But here's where I think he can be a little different. Michael Porter is a pure shooter, and his shot selection his first 2 seasons in the NBA was laughable, and yet he shot really well. He shot even better, 44% from 3, 42% from 3, because he's such a good shooter that bad shots can be good shots for him. And I think there's a value to having a guy. Klay Thompson was this guy. He would take bad shots, but guess what? He made enough of them that you ran out on him all the time, even if you thought like it would be dumb for him to shoot this, but I have to go and run him off the line because there's that gravity there. I think Michael Porter has culled those bad shots. He's reduced them in a way that it was smart and it served its purpose. They won a title that way. But I think now you can open it up a little bit. Sometimes you have to reduce a guy a little bit, overcorrect, and then say, okay, but there is a little more leeway. And to me, that's where he can make himself a more impactful player. It's not a lot. It's 1 or 2 shots a game that Denver builds into their offense that says, hey, we're living with this. You come off the handoff and you just go into your shooting motion. Like you see a tiny little bit of daylight, not the best shot, doesn't matter. We need that defender to jump out at you every time you're running off of a handoff. So go off of them. And some games you're going to go 3 for 3 on those and it'll break the game wide open.
Even just the pure concept of having him on the floor seems more important than ever now when you remove KCP from the equation and throw maybe some question mark shooters into the fold.
Well, this is why another one of the most interesting storylines to me is in years past, Jamal Murray is always the guy that you stagger, and Michael Porter is not well-rounded enough of a player to carry a bench unit. He just isn't. Mm-hmm. And we've seen him when Murray and Jokic have been out, what it looks like. It looks horrible. He looks worse than, what you would expect of a player that caliber. Like Kevin Huerter would probably carry a team better than Michael Porter would in that position. But you give Russell Westbrook and Dario Saric 2 playmakers, 2 setup guys. I think that he needs to be the stagger guy. I at least would love to see it for 15 games. Just give it a long sample size of, okay, you need shooting off the bench, and you need a guy who now you can really slide that scale up of who else is going to shoot the ball. So you're out there, and if Westbrook kicks it to you, man, that ball goes up. I don't care how open or not open you are, that ball goes up from 3. And I think that when you talk about, does he have more to go? It's the same skill set, but in a different role that might allow him to shine a little bit more.
The 3 players I'm going to ask you about, not playing roles, but they're taking up roster spots. So I think that it's important. Denver has all 15 guaranteed contracts in the books right now. So I want to start just any impressions or thoughts on them overarchingly. Jalen Pickett.
So Jalen Pickett, I think, is a guy that is over. He's done. And I think he is an example of when we talk about the schism. And I knew this early on. I'd always tell people, it was going into his rookie season because I liked the skill set. You go into summer league, and I thought he had a pretty good summer league. And then going into camp and just talking to people, and I was like, this guy is not a guy that the coaching staff likes. This guy is out from day one. And of course, from there, he has gotten progressively worse. So he's a guy that I look at and I say, I think it's done. I think there's 0 chance for him. I think his confidence is shot. And the last several weeks, he has not been spotted in the gym, and I don't believe he's been in Denver. All the other young guys are in Denver working out in front of the coaching staff. And I just look at that and I go, I think the coaching staff knows that's not our guy. He knows the coaching staff thinks that's not our guy. So he's out. Hunter, are you moving on to the next one?
Yeah. He of 2 first names, Hunter Tyson.
Hunter Tyson to me is interesting because I think he's another guy that when we talk about Calvin Booth had a vision, okay, we have this new CBA. We're going to have to bring in some young guys now. I think Michael Malone looked at that and said, 3 rookies on a defending title team? Like, no way. They're out. Pickett out. Hunter Tyson out. But unlike Pickett, who I think was always like a risky play, he's just short and he's slow. Like that, he was always going to be a risk to hit. Hunter Tyson to me has a skill set Denver needs, shooting. He might be the 3rd best or 4th best shooter on the entire team. He's really reliable. He's tall. He's not a great player, in my opinion, all around, although we haven't seen a ton of him. But he is a good shooter. And you look at it and go, Denver needs shooting. That bench lineup might need him over time. So I think he might actually get a chance at some point this year. I think he's still on the outside looking in. But in most years, I would look at him and say, no chance he's getting in. What's he doing on the roster? Why do you have this guy? And now I look at it and go, Denver doesn't have that many guys and they need shooting. He might get a chance.
DaRon Holmes obviously has the Achilles injury. But when you go back, we were just doing our Western Conference grades, and I don't think I appreciated in the moment like how much they gave up like to move up and get him. It's not like super egregious, but it was like stuff. Any early impressions on him or just the organization's view of him?
Well, I think it's kind of tragic, to be honest with you, because here's DaRon Holmes brought shooting, And I actually think he was a pretty good shooter. And I know that's one of the number one things he was emphasizing. His numbers weren't great his first 2 years. Obviously, last year was phenomenal. And I think from everything I'd heard, in the gym and everything else, he was showing that he was actually a real shooter, a guy that, in the years to come would be a shooter. Defensive, like he kind of tied the team, the vision together in some ways. And I don't think you should have expected that this year. But the problem with using draft capital, moving up in the draft, having so many young players on your roster is every year of development matters. And you kind of lose one development year for him being out this entire year. So even if that plan was a good one, which we don't know if it was, but even if it was, you basically reset the clock next year and he's a rookie next season. So for me, that hurts. I think if you're Calvin Booth, your vision was the team is good this year, maybe he wins a title. And then next year, you basically have a first-round pick in DaRon Holmes because he went through the system in a year and he's coming to your team. That's not going to happen now. He's going to be another year behind, and that hurts. But I like him as a player. Circumstances matter, and he unfortunately got hurt in his very first Summer League game.
I want to couch this next question by saying, if anyone's viewing this through the lens of just because they like KCP walk, that's not why I feel this way. I almost can't just it's ineffable. Like I can't describe why I feel this way, but I don't know if I have PTSD from the Jamal Murray experience last season and through the Olympics, but is there just a chance with the emphasis they're placing on the youth and just looking at this, like adding Russell Westbrook into the fold, that they're just putting too much or asking too much of Nikola Jokic to tie this entire thing together on the offensive end?
I mean, of course, but that's true of every superstar player, right? Like heavy is the head that wears the crown. So for me, yes, Jokic has to be the best player in the world for Denver to have a chance, but I think that's just inevitable. The way I would answer your question, though, that I think is fair is Jokic has put this team on his back for 5 straight seasons. Murray was out for 2 of those. They obviously won a title, in 2023. Last year, he's carrying the team. I think at some point, he's now 29. He'll be 30 by the end of the year. At some point, you look at it and go, can he do that, though? Like LeBron could carry his team for the first 10 years of his career. No problem. Not even tired. I'm carrying this team. I'm playing 40 minutes a night. I can do it. But at some point, you get to an age where it is, yeah, but that's not smart to ride him that many minutes. And I think Denver has to be at that point. And I would agree with you that, again, Michael Malone knows you get fired for 7-7. You don't get fired for 9-5. So I think there's going to be some games in November where it's very clear that Jokic is at 35 minutes. We probably shouldn't play him this many, but man, if we just play him another 4 minutes tonight, we can still win here. And I just think we're going to see him at some point start to wear down. And by the way, I think it happened last year. I was thinking about this. We're not that far removed from when Jokic played 65 of 68 minutes. And it was one of the most impressive feats. He sprints the floor. He does all this stuff. He's still in great shape. But he wore down last year in the playoffs, and he wore down because of the regular season and cumulative wear and everything else. But I look at that and I go, could Jokic play 65 of 68? Not that he should, but could he play that like he did a few years ago? I don't know. And maybe that's the age, right? You can do that at 25. You can't do that at 29. And that was one of Jokic's advantages, is that he didn't wear down when other people did. And so if you lose that, that is one. Like, I don't think Jokic has really lost anything in Rim's game. He's still ascending. But that might be the one thing he's lost, is that ability to not wear down against other teams.
And I was going to say that maybe the extra break, because you lose it. He's played so much basketball over the past few years, but then, so you have that break, but then you go right into the Olympics where he's playing his ass off anyway. So,
yeah.
Are you ready for the cookie cutter lightning round portion of the podcast?
Let's do it.
So is there anything about this team that we haven't discussed that you think is just flying under the radar, deserves more attention?
To be honest, not really. I mean, we talked about all of these, the major storylines here. I think Denver, everybody knew Denver was going to take DaRon Holmes. Like, there's so much about Denver that is kind of known. I think they're less mysterious than they have been in years past. So the cards are to some degree out on the table.
We've come a long way from the discourse of, can Nikola Jokic be the best player on a championship team, though?
Yeah.
Short 2 years. When you look at this roster, before we see any games, before training camp opens, what do you view as its biggest need?
Shooting. I think it's probably just, if you're going to be optimistic about all the pieces fitting, all the pieces that Denver has, the shooting is the one thing where it's just hard to say, well, you need Saric to really make his threes, and you need Strawther, who's a rookie. And even though we think he's a good shooter, didn't shoot a good percentage his rookie year. And maybe Peyton needs a little bump and all that. There's just a lot of guys that you feel like need to shoot better than what their market average would be. And so that's probably shooting. And then depth. I mean, the other thing about this is we're talking about Denver's fully healthy roster. Let's just look at point guard. You have Murray and you have Russell Westbrook. And then we have Jalen Pickett and Trey Alexander, who I like, but he's a two-way player. So you have only two guys. Well, Murray missed 23 games last year. If he missed 23 this year, Westbrook starts. Who's the backup point guard? There's not a clear option there. So
Peyton Watson time, Adam.
maybe it is. Maybe it's Trey Alexander. Who knows? But I look at it and I just go, Denver fully healthy, playoffs. I can talk myself into a lot, but we just know there's going to be games throughout the course of the year where you're like, wow, Aaron Gordon's out and there's really nobody. What is the guy behind him now? Who's Hunter Tyson's in the game? Like, I think there's going to be a lot of games where there's the depth will really, you'll see Denver's thin depth at points throughout the regular season.
That was a nice segue into this. So when you look at when they're fully healthy, and if you had to pin it down to a top 10 rotation, it feels like there's 9 locks, right? When you look at the starters, if we include Brown, then you're going to throw Peyton, Russ, Saric, and Julian Strawther. So would that be the 9 locks? And then who would you think gets that 10 spot?
Well, there's not a great option there, is there? Because you're either talking about Vlatko Čančar, Zeke Naji, or Hunter Tyson, or maybe even DeAndre Jordan if you decide to move Saric to 4 or what have you. I don't know. I think Zeke Naji maybe has the inside track. I mean, Vlatko Čančar I like a lot. And in theory, again, the Westbrook piece of this complicates things. But in theory, a Saric, Vlatko, both of those guys are very smart. They both can shoot a little bit. They know how to defend their position and play team defense. And they're just smart players, and I like them together. But does Westbrook kind of mitigate their strengths? Is the ball in his hand? And those guys are good as connectors, right? They're swinging the ball. Well, Westbrook's not necessarily swinging the ball himself. So does it take something out there? And then Zeke Naji, he might be in the sweet spot. This is the, but it might just work this year. Zeke Naji has been a guy that has been like, it's his time now for 2 years. 2 years, it's like, well, here it is. The red carpet is rolled out for you. And both years, and again, I think a little bit of this is he's a casualty of Michael Malone. I don't think Michael Malone has ever liked him. I don't think he has gotten the best chance. If you look at players who have played the most minutes, but the fewest with other starters, I think he's number 1 on the list. He never plays with the good players on Denver's roster. So I think he's been set up in a way, and to some extent, some of this is on him, but he's been put in the toughest position of all players on Denver. That being said, this year he needs to make shots. And if he'll get his chances because Denver's so thin. There is a world where he can shoot the ball well this year. And it's like, hey, Zeke Naji out there alongside Saric. And now we actually have some shooting because both of those guys can shoot. I'm not betting on it, but that is the avenue now. And by the way, Zeke Naji, everyone's given up with. The fan base has given up on. The coach has given up on. Sometimes that's nice to be over the hump to where it's like, okay, nobody expects anything of me. So maybe I'll make my threes this year.
I won't ever quit on Zeke Naji. I'm just going to continue to go to
really.
bat. I was elated when they signed that extension to him. I was like, oh, that was so smart. It's a contract they could move, or he's going to look like a bargain. That take aged like milk so far, but I'm holding out hope. So this is like the 9th consecutive year where this question is stupid, but what is their most used crunch time unit just going to be the starters with, we're assuming Christian Braun is in that?
What I think is interesting about that question is Denver has had a clear cut starting and closing 5 for most of their Jokic Murray era. And I think when you look at a lot of your best teams, and again, I keep going back to the Spoelsters and the Dagnots, they didn't have that. And it wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. It was, what does the game call for? Oh, we need a little bit more of this. Isaiah Joe out there. We need a little bit more of this. Let's put Giddey out there. We need a little more of this. Let's put Case and Wallace out there. Denver, I think this year is in position for that. I don't think it fits Michael Malone's coaching style. I think he really likes to, we are who we are, and we go out there. So I would say, yes, it's going to be Christian Braun. But in my opinion, there would be nights where it'd be nice to see Julian in that role. It would be nice to see Peyton Watson in one of those roles. And to me, that would be Denver's strength. That would really prepare them for a postseason, which, by the way, Michael Malone will do that in a postseason, but he never does that in a regular season. So this year, I think they have a clear-cut closing 4. And I think that there is a spot that you have 3 options, maybe even 4. Let's say Russell Westbrook, it surprises us all. Maybe he could be a guy that closes in certain circumstances there. And I just think Michael Malone would need to have his finger on the pulse and be willing. I think one of the reasons he doesn't do that, and this is my own opinion, one of the reasons he likes to have his starting 5 is there's no controversy there. Yeah, everybody closes the same every year. We don't have to go to the locker room and explain myself. You choose a guy and then you lose the game. Everybody knows in the NBA, like, that's tough. You have to have, that can hurt your culture if you have to answer for, well, why did he do this and not that? And I just think Michael Malone knows that's a vulnerability I'm going to avoid.
Do you think, because I guess we didn't kind of settle on this, you mentioned how principled he is, but do you think the roster is going to force him to, like, we're not even talking about just the crunch time, but experiment on some level here? Because he's out of other options or out of the way to like, I'm going to use these. Like, you don't even have 8 guys you can just view on a crutch on this roster anymore.
I'm telling you, I think that you and I, it's easy to do that because we don't have $1 million contract that could go away in 1 month when we do something wrong. And I just think that experiment, yes. But we all know when a coach experiments and it works, genius. Man, they throw out all these combo and look, he's willing to get crazy and zany and it's great. When a coach throws out combinations like that and it doesn't work, there's no consistency. Nobody knows what their role is. Nobody knows what's going on. It's like, it's a very easy thing to criticize a coach for. And I think Michael Malone knows that. Whereas, as I said earlier in the show, if you kind of play this straight, no creativity, no adjusting night by night, none of that stuff, you can just look at it and say, we got killed because we just didn't have the right guys. I played the guys I'm given and they don't do the job and I'm doing the best I can. And in a year where, by the way, he doesn't have a contract extension, neither does Calvin Booth. I think both guys are like trying to impress dad and, both guys trying to be the one that's left standing at the end of this and justify game theory this out. Maybe I'm overthinking this. Maybe they don't think.
I honestly would have thought from my like million-foot perspective of if you're going this route that Calvin Booth has gone, I just would have expected that there needed to be more alignment between coach and front office because if you're the front office, okay, Michael Malone will get criticized in the media for if the Nuggets lose, but like if you've actually wanted these young guys to play, you have to understand that like the opportunity cost there might be victories or regular season awkwardness. And I understand Malone's, if you want to call it stubbornness or perspective, especially based off what happened in Sacramento,
right.
But like, I find it mind-boggling that we're multiple years of like the Nuggets clearly laying this out. And like, how is there not more of an alignment here between the coach and the front office then?
Again, I just think that you have very principled people that, have succeeded. It's just the same thing with you get the star college players drafted 28th and he comes in, it's like, hey, can you be a corner shooter? That's not what got me here, man. What got me here was doing what I do. It's like, yeah, but you're at a new level. You need to change. I think Michael Malone's a guy that I know what got me here and I know how coaches get fired and I grew up and I've gotten all this advice from, following in my father's footsteps. And I just think that he knows that. Again, and I know this personally, like I'm part of a startup, right, at All City that I see these different dynamics. You can be right about something and feel principled about the direction. But the truth is nobody in a team or in a corporation or in anything is a sole decision maker. And I think that he kind of understands, everybody kind of understands that, hey, Calvin Booth might have had one vision, but if everybody doesn't buy into that vision, it doesn't matter. And Michael Malone, the same thing. He has a vision, but if Calvin Booth doesn't buy into it, it doesn't matter. And those two are just going to have to find the right harmony. And by the way, not just them. I think ownership is a part of this. And I even think some of the players are a part of it, to be honest with you, because when we talk about who plays on the bench and who doesn't, some of this I think has a little bit to do, not a lot, but a little bit to do with what do the players want? Does Jokic want to play with those guys? Does Michael Porter want to play with the bench? Like, I think there's a level of, I don't want to be responsible for that.
Is there a weirdo, funky, offbeat lineup you're hoping that Michael Malone might roll out this season?
So there's so many funky lineups, right? Like anything with Westbrook and Jokic is funky to me. I have no idea how that's going to work. If it works, it's awesome. So I would like to see those two play together quite a bit. I want to see Peyton Watson handle the ball. I don't expect it, but I would love to see opportunities for him to play with a little bit more shooting and a little bit more, hey, you're bringing the ball up. You're coming off this dribble handoff and trying to read the court off of it. So those would be the things I think I'm most interested in.
Yeah, you know what? We need to see the Peyton Watson, and we'll just throw Julian Strawther, Michael Porter Jr., Dario Saric, and Zeke Naji out there, and it's a Peyton Watson.
I think that one might be bad. Zeke Naji, I'm so worried about. I will say this: I want to see Michael Porter play more 4 with the bench. So if you put Saric at the 5 and him at the 4, I'm curious how you build a lineup so that he is a true 4 in that, and not like him and Peyton Watson together. Who's the 3? Who's the 4? Defensive, it doesn't matter. But if he is alongside Christian Braun and Julian Strawther, okay, he's clearly the 4 here, and I think that gives you some good spacing.
As we record this, their over-under is set at 51.5. Taking everything into account, would you go with the over or the under on that?
Every single year of the entire Jokic era, I have taken the over. And I think I've been right every single year, except for one, in the bubble, where they lost all those bubble games, if you recall. So they were on pace to beat it, and then they went like 2-8 in the bubble to end the season. That technically put them as an under. But I think so every year I've gone over. This might be the first year where I'm tempted to take the under. And I think again, I have a month. I probably won't make this real pick until I see preseason and see how some of this stuff comes together. But at this very moment, I think under might be the better play. And it's not because I don't think they'll be good. They're just so thin and there's so many question marks. Are they going to get off to a hot start? This is the least continuity we've seen. I imagine there's going to be a period of time where they figure out who and what they are and what the rotation is. So that hurts you a little bit. The West is more loaded than ever. So I think that hurts you a little bit. And then if any of Jokic, Gordon, or Murray, or even Westbrook probably to some degree, miss any amount of time, 10 games, I think Denver's going to struggle over that stretch. So I think there's too many variables that would lead me to think Denver wins 50 games this year, maybe 51, and not above. So this might be the first year I take the under on Denver in the Jokic era.
Now, when you view it through a championship equity perspective, where you can kind of like maybe they don't have a great regular season, but you're looking at who can win the title, where do you think they stack up in that Minnesota, Oklahoma City, Dallas tier of it on? If you want to throw another team from the, like if you think Phoenix is going to be on that level, feel free to throw them in there too.
I do think Phoenix is on that level this year. I am buying them. What's that?
There's no wings. Like I just don't.
I mean, look, they have their flaws. They're like they've been in years past, and that their upside is so high, but they do have their tragic flaws. But I think the things that have made them weak in the past will be there a little bit. But to me, it's matchups. And I think Denver, if they are healthy at the end of the season, I still think that they're going to be a tier 1 contender. Boston has done it, and they have a little bit more well-rounded in depth, so they might be the favorite overall. But when I look at a Dallas, they're also a flawed team. I mean, even last year, as impressive as it was that they went and they went to the finals and they were very good, they didn't look like an unbeatable team to me, especially out west. Minnesota is a great matchup for Denver, and I think that might even be a better matchup against Denver than they were last year, just by account of whatever you think of Russell Westbrook, however high you want to be on it, it fits, and all of a sudden all the pieces fit. Minnesota's the type of team, though, that they're going to have people in the paint. And when you have length on the perimeter to close out and guys in the paint, like what does Westbrook do? So I think Minnesota matches up with Denver really well. I don't think they're better than Denver, but I think they match up with Denver really well. But I think Denver should be, to me, alongside Phoenix, Dallas, Minnesota. If they get to the playoffs healthy, I think they'll have a top 7 that is as good as anyone, and they'll have the best player in the series.
Before I end my interrogation, is there anything about this team I did not ask you about that you think we need to touch upon before I let you skedaddle?
I don't think so. You know, the contract piece of this is important to me. Michael Malone, by the way, is going to become, here's what's so funny about it. So Michael Malone and Calvin Booth both need contract extensions, right? Michael Malone is 9 games away from becoming the winningest coach in Denver Nuggets history, currently held by Doug Moe. Doug Moe's jersey is hung up in the Raptors at Ball Arena. That's what a figure he is. So you're talking about a guy without a contract extension, and what direction do you go forward if things go south? And oh, by the way, this was going to be a season of celebration of Michael Malone. So it's kind of a funny layer, right? Like he might get all these accolades, and we're talking about history and everything else. And oh, by the way, you're out the door if things don't go well.
We could be in store for some epic like press conferences from this team, that from Michael Malone specifically, then throughout the season.
I think that's definitely true. Michael Malone is the king of that. And I think Michael Malone will be must-see TV this year.
Adam, this was great as always. Thank you so much for your time. Were you just able to tell our listeners and viewers where they could find you and all the great work that you do?
Obviously, DNVR Nuggets. Most people watching this probably know that. And then the All-NBA show. Me and Tim Legler will be back here in about a month or so. We'll be back in about a month. And
I'm excited. That's real sicko stuff. You guys do a great job on that one too.
He's the best, man. And then this year we're adding some new people to the rotation. So I'm excited for that as well.
Ooh. Well, thank you so much once again. And as you know by now, I will be pestering you again in the future.